we call ourselves the People's College Football Show here. And we could not accurately say that if we did not involve the people into this show. So if you're tuned into the live show, one, we're going to get to some of y'all's thoughts and questions, concerns after we get off the air, or not after we get off the air, after we get through some of these segments here in that live chat. So make sure you're blowing that up right now. Nick Brake's going to join us here in a few minutes. But if you're watching this show on a clip later on YouTube, we go to my social platforms a fair amount to hear from y'all and to crowdsource, if you will. So I asked the question on Twitter and on Instagram. What are going to be the most surprising headlines we get this college football season? And y'all answered in full force, as you always do, with a lot of great ones. So without further ado, let's jump right into this. We got a good one here from Fickle Train, which is a hilarious and elite username. On Twitter, he asked, or rather said, Wisconsin is going to stun undefeated Ohio State, and then Wisconsin is also undefeated. They moved to 8-0. And the first feeling I got, if I were to imagine this scenario happening, it would feel a lot like I think Tennessee beating Alabama last year felt. Because Bama's, been the standard for a long time in college football. Ohio State has been the standard for a long time in the Big Ten, with the exception of the last 2 years. Like, they're kind of the big kid on the block. And if Wisconsin were to take them down and stay undefeated in this scenario, I don't think it is wildly unlikely. It would be surprising for sure. I'm not predicting it, but I think there's definitely a path there. But if Wisconsin were to do this, it would feel a lot like how Tennessee felt last year. Like, okay, this whole operation under Josh Heupel, this whole operation in Madison, Wisconsin under Luke Fickell in his first year, we are ahead of schedule. To take down the big dog in year one, we're ahead of schedule. It would probably also mean that the offense that has been put together under Phil Longo, that you brought in to now kind of revitalize that approach, be a little bit more vertical in the pass game, brought in a transfer quarterback in Tanner Mordecai. You brought in multiple transfer portal wide receivers. It means that worked in a big way, and it means Tanner Mordecai is probably just absolutely dealing the pill like it's his job. And he's probably getting some Heisman love if he takes down Ohio State. Now, it's early in the year for sure. It's late October, but even so, he's going to get some real national buzz if that were to happen. But it also means that the run game that we've known Wisconsin to be, like you think about Wisconsin football, you think about neck rolls and you think about grunting and hitting other grown men in the trenches. You think about that with Wisconsin football. I think that's still very much intact should they beat a team like Ohio State. Because against Ohio State, make no mistake, you will have to earn your deep shots. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to go out there and be one-dimensional, and say, Ohio State, we're going to throw the ball 45, 50 times a game. We're going to do that right now in this game. Get ready. I think Ohio State is skilled enough on the back end to be able to play you straight up if you're one-dimensional. But if Braylon Allen gets rolling, who is that grown man that we've talked about a few times on here, if he gets rolling, then that means you have to kind of add more numbers to that box. Maybe you get tired of him getting 5-6 yards a carry, and then you hit those deep shots. So, yes, it's a new era of Wisconsin offensive football, but I'll promise you, they are not out with the old, in with the new. It's, hey, old, stay around. We're going to keep you here. We're also going to have the new, but that old, I think, will complement the new is what I'm trying to tell you. And that defense, too, is not going anywhere. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best player in college football. That's not a quarterback. Some people might say he's the best player in college football, period, and I wouldn't have a very easy time arguing that. If that defense is able to, I don't know if limit him is even the word, able to make him the only factor or just find a way to win this football game, it would mean that the defense did their job enough against Marvin Harrison Jr., regardless of whatever he puts up in the stat sheet. But for Ohio State, if they were to lose this game, you got to really look in the mirror. I mean, what is going on in the secondary if you lose this game? I told you, I think they got to play them straight up, or they're probably good enough to play straight up. But, I mean, a lot of what they did this past offseason was to improve in the secondary through the portal. Jahad Carter, when got him through the portal. Davidson Igbenosum from Ole Miss, they got him through the portal. What are we doing in the secondary? And what issues do we have that are going to be lingering after this game in the secondary that are going to keep us from accomplishing what we want to do? I think you also say, what do we look like offensively? Because we've seen Ohio State a couple of times get into situations that they're just able to score their way out of. I don't know who's playing quarterback for them at this point in time, but I think you really have to look in the mirror if you're Ohio State and you can't find a way to outscore a first-year offense, a first-year system in Madison, Wisconsin to get over that one. And I think the biggest frustration for an Ohio State fan, and if you do lose this game, this would be a spot where you let down because you just played Penn State. Ohio State plays Penn State the week before, then they play Wisconsin. And if you were to have a letdown from game to game, what do you look at? You look at the locker room. You look at the leadership. And I think that crowd that is just waiting for a reason to talk down on Ryan Day, that crowd that believes that he's not the right guy for the job, you just give them more ammunition. I'm not saying I believe that, but I do think you have to look at the talent that's in-house at Ohio State. They are good enough to beat Wisconsin. If you don't do it, it's because of game plan. It's because of attention to detail. It's because of your approach to the game. It's all the internal things that you don't take care of to lose that game. Now, if Wisconsin wins. But, I mean, it makes that game at Michigan a whole lot more impactful than it already was, and it already was the biggest game on your schedule. I mean, it makes that game for your college football playoff life. And even then, maybe you need some help. So that would definitely be a surprising headline, but it's a headline that has enormous ripple effects. Now, very important you're following me on Instagram, because Jeff Tinks hit me up on Instagram. And his surprising headline is that Auburn wildly exceeds expectations. So to break this one down, we got to first unpack what would wildly exceeding expectations look like. The over-under in Las Vegas for their win total in 2023 for Auburn is 6.5 wins. Now, most people say the ceiling for Auburn is somewhere around 9 wins. Okay, so that's the floor, somewhere around 6.5. Ceiling is somewhere around 9. But we're talking about wildly exceeding expectations. We're not taking that phrase lightly. Wildly exceeding means wildly exceeding. It means doing much more than what we thought. So we're going to go ahead and put the number for wildly exceeding expectations from a win total standpoint at 10 wins for Auburn in 2023. I think that would very much so warrant that headline. So what would have to happen for that to be a reality? It's no secret. Hugh Freeze walked into the building that is Auburn football and said, we gotta figure this thing out talent-wise. We are not where we need to be. Went to the transfer portal, got over 20 transfers. If they win 10 football games, I think you put their hit rate on those transfers at somewhere around 90 to 95%. It means Justin Rogers from Kentucky making his presence felt. It means Austin Keys from Ole Miss on the defensive line, or the edge defender, outside linebacker, whatever you want to call him. He's making his presence felt. And they're doing a lot in the run game to be head and shoulders better than they were last year, because they allowed 182 rush yards a game. Folks, that is not going to cut it. And these transfers, if they're able to ratchet that down a good bit and they're able to win 10 games, you would look right at the new pieces and say, y'all did that. Look at the defensive scheme too with Ron Roberts, but you say that was a big piece that we had to get corrected to wildly exceed expectations. So that would have to happen. Going back to the quarterbacks, as it pertains to the transfer portal rather, you can assume it's Peyton Thorne. We're hearing a lot of good things actually about Holden Geriner. You're hearing a lot of good things about Robbie Ashford, actually, too. I think Vegas, actually, there were some lines that had Robbie Ashford as the favorite to start for Auburn. I'm not calling my shot necessarily right now. I think you brought in Peyton Thorne to start. But regardless, if you were to win 10 football games at Auburn, you would have figured out the quarterback position in a very real way. Like, you found the guy to really get the offense headed the right direction. And some of that feels a little bit common knowledge. Like, yeah, JD, no duh. You win 10 football games, you probably got good quarterback play. But the way that Hugh Freeze and Philip Montgomery are going to run this offense, it is a quarterback-centric offense. Everything goes through the quarterback. It is RPO, run-pass option. You have a decision on a multitude of plays to get us going the right direction and to be able to make this offense succeed. So in short, offense, we're going to go as you go. So for the quarterback to be on his P's and Q's, that would be a very big deal for them to win 10 games. The subplot there is that all of these cats they're working with could come back next year. Like Robbie Ashford could come back another year. Peyton Thorne could come back another year. Holden Geriner could come back another year. So whoever starts for them, if he figures it out and wins 10 football games, the future is extremely bright. And you already feel pretty good about the future right now in Auburn, Alabama. We have to talk about this, and I don't want to unpack it too much because it's such a fluid situation. But if Auburn wins 10 football games, the Jarquez Hunter situation probably got figured out. And I don't know what that looks like, and I don't mean to make light of any situation legally, but the Jarquez Hunter situation, there is no way around it. He is probably your best player on your roster, and for how much Auburn's going to lean on the run game this coming season, if you win 10 football games, I have to believe that Jarquez Hunter has a lot of say in that. And I believe he's in your lineup if that were to happen. But to zoom it out a little bit more, if Auburn wins 10 football games, think about who they would have had to beat. It means you won 2 of these 4 games. You got Georgia, at LSU, Ole Miss, Bama. You go 2-2 in that stretch? Holy smokes. They're building the statue to Hugh Freeze right now if you go 2-2 in that stretch, man. What would that do for the recruiting as well? What would that do for what they're doing in terms of trying to get kids to buy the vision at Auburn, to buy the Hugh Freeze pitch at Auburn? Number 14 class right now in the 2024 On3 industry team recruiting rankings, if they were to win 10 football games and have wins against teams like the teams I just mentioned, I mean, slice it any way you want. Let's say you win the game against LSU and the game against Ole Miss. Like, if you were to win any two of those, that would be a very real example, a very tangible example of where things are at under Hugh Freeze. You can package up, put it in a box, give it to a recruit and say, this is what you're going to be a part of here. This is what we have right now. It's only year one. Come jump on board. And I promise you that would create rocket fuel for the Auburn Tigers on the recruiting trail. And I have to believe they'd be flirting with a top 10 class come National Signing Day. That's just my feel on it. But again, wildly exceeding expectations in my book would include all those things, and wildly exceeding expectations would look a lot like 10 wins for Auburn in 2023. Now, another headline we got was from our man Kevin G. Kevin G hit me up on Twitter, and he said, Florida State will have a record-setting offense. They'll have a close loss in the regular season against Clemson, but they will get revenge in the conference title game of the ACC. Very important to note now, the ACC, no more divisions. It is Hunger Games, ACC football. Best two teams, run it back at the end of the year. So the very real possibility, I think a lot of people expect us to get Florida State, Clemson at the end of the regular season. The interesting piece to me, the Jenga piece that I'm looking at, is that term record-setting offense. If they have a record-setting offense, that means they probably scored somewhere around 50 a game. The 2013 national title team with Jameis Winston, they scored 51 points a game, so you're somewhere in that neighborhood if you're record-setting. If they have a record-setting offense, I'm just going to go ahead and believe they win every game. Like Joe Burrow and company scored 48 a game. You hear what I'm saying? If you score 50 a game, it is going to be very difficult for me to believe that Florida State loses a football game. So let's play this out, though, because that situation you laid out. If Florida State has a record-setting offense, but they still lose a game to Clemson, what does that say about Clemson? What does that say about what Clemson does the rest of the season? Because I have to believe if Clemson is able to keep pace with an offense that's scoring 50 points a game, the Cade Klubnik and Garrett Riley thing worked in a very real way. And I bet if you beat them in the conference title game, have a hard time believing Clemson's not undefeated in that game. Can you imagine a world with all of the conference realignment nonsense going on right now around the ACC and Clemson and Florida State wanting to leave? If Clemson and Florida State both make the college football playoff as one-loss teams, kind of like what we saw with Ohio State, Michigan last year, except both these teams play for their conference title, I think the college football world would just detonate. I think the whole thing would just short circuit and cease to exist. But even so, I think that's a very real possibility should that situation play itself out. If they have a record-setting offense, there's no way around it for me. I think Florida State's definitely a college football playoff team because I think the defense is going to be really solid as well. So there's a lot of impact there if Florida State and Clemson were to meet in the ACC title game and if they both finish with one loss in the regular season. We'll put a lot of pressure on that committee. We'll make a lot of people feel better about moving to a 12-team college football playoff, even though I'm not a big fan of it. Another video for another time. That would be the impact of that. Last one from Matthew Buchanan. Hit me up on Twitter. He said, Nebraska is going 4-0 heading into the Michigan game with huge momentum. Now, Matthew, I don't think this is wildly unlikely. It would mean that they went 4-0 against the following. It means they beat Minnesota at Minnesota. It's probably the trickiest game. It means they won the game at Colorado, which I would expect them to be favored in, quite frankly. They beat NIU. They beat Louisiana Tech. Depending on how they look, this would mean that the new brand of football that Matt Rule is bringing to Nebraska, it means that has taken shape in a very real way early. Because last year, Nebraska, just to be real, they lost to teams they should not have lost to. I love Ryan Halitzky at Northwestern. They should not have lost to Northwestern in Ireland. Should have won that football game. Woulda, shoulda, coulda. You should not have lost to Georgia Southern and allowed them to score 42 points on you in that game. Nebraska was losing to teams that they should have beat. If they go 4-0, they will have beat teams they're supposed to beat and also, I think, control the controllables. Because that's been the headache for Nebraska the last couple of years. Special teams errors, penalties, turnovers, like all those things were just really, really bad the last couple of years. If you correct those early, I think that's crucial. I think that's required for them to go 4-0. That game at Minnesota is probably the one that you look most closely at and say, I don't know where things stand in terms of the line or what they look like going into that game or what to make of Minnesota. But I think they should beat Colorado, NIU, and Louisiana Tech. No knock on Coach Prime. I think he's just trying to get things figured out there roster-wise and all the guys took to the portal. I think they should win all those games. So momentum going into the game against Michigan. I mean, whatever happens against Michigan happens. But if you were to show up in that game 4-0, I'm not saying you beat Michigan. Actually, I'm not even touching that conversation. But you do feel pretty good about your chance to make a bowl game. Because you're 4-0 with 8 tries left the rest of the year to get 2 wins. And what have we said about Nebraska throughout the course of the last couple of years? If they could just get to a bowl game, it would feel like they're headed the right direction. Over-under win total is 6 in Vegas. There's a feeling right now that if they were to get 2 wins if they were to get 6 wins, that would be a very good situation as to where things are right now under Matt Rule at Nebraska. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.